Okay, so today I'm going to kind of talk about I think a common problem that people with older homes are going to have replacing the fan unit in their bathroom, ceiling fan or exhaust fan. Um, so this is the model I have, the Broan 663/688. I'm not quite sure why there's two numbers there, but in doing some research, I found that this is no longer made. The model, they stopped it in the mid 80s. So basically, this unit here, the brown metal, is what was in my fan unit. You can see I've got a new uh, motor installed and fan. And at first glance, when you start doing the research on the parts, you find out that they installed the new fan kind of reverse or upside down. The brackets are different, so I didn't think they would work at first, and so it kind of delayed the installation of the new fan because it's not a direct replacement. Notice the the size difference here in the metal, the sheet metal. The new ones are a little over 7 inches, and the old ones are 8 inches. So if you try to put the 7 inch one in the 8 inch hole, you're going to have a big gap there, and you won't get it to fit. And so I had to adapt the new motor onto the old metal frame. So this is the old motor here. Basically, this has these two screws here that came up through the bracket right here. And it was simple to take it off. You just remove the nuts, and then the motor and fan assembly slipped right off, and no big deal. The challenge, and as it turns out, not much of a challenge when you think through it, was the how to get the new motor onto the old frame. I didn't have to drill anything. I didn't have to bend anything. Just had to get a little creative with some shims to keep this bearing right here as you tightened this down from rubbing on the metal bracket. And you can kind of see that there's a gap in there that if you tighten it too tight, you end up squeezing the bearing housing down against the shaft, and then the motor won't turn. So basically, all I did was I took out these two screws from the new motor. This particular one I have here has it looks like a Torx head. And then there's in the bottom, there's these nuts you can see here. Right, get my finger in there. Right here. Right there. So those two nuts come off, and then the motor just comes right off this new frame here. So if you leave these bolts right here in pointing the way they are, this will not fit on this frame. And the reason is because it's mounted upside down. This is mounted bolted downward. This one is bolted upward. So by removing these two screws all the way out and then reinserting them in the other direction, I was able to essentially reverse the mounting angle of this motor. The problem I ran into was that the threads for these screws are down in this part and not in this piece right here, because this is that bearing housing I was telling you about. So when you reverse the bolts, you're threaded all the way through, but the threads don't come through this piece here. And so I had to do something to keep tension on this housing here. And basically all I did was I put an extra nut on the threaded piece that sticks through and tightened it so that it held the bearing housing tight against the shaft and the bearing without squeezing it to cause resistance. Now, in order to not have the bearing housing contact the bracket here and squeeze as I tightened these two nuts, I just inserted a number 8 washer between the nut and the washer, or the bracket here, to create a gap. So as I tightened this bolt and tightened it snug, there's a gap between the housing and the metal bracket here. And as you can see, spins freely. So this is actually working. This unit right here is actually working in my bathroom upstairs. I bought an extra one because it was such a slick change out, and didn't take very long once I figured out what I had to do with reversing the bolts and the shims. That is probably a 15-minute job at most. So I bought an extra one here. I'm going to just keep it in the box because I have another fan just like it in the downstairs bathroom that eventually is going to start getting noisy, or it's going to stop, and I'm going to have to do the same thing to that. So here's what you're looking for. I bought this at Home Depot. It's a new tone. It turns out I think Broan bought new tone, or vice versa. So this is what you're looking for at Home Depot, the C350BN. That is the one you want for if you have the Broan model 663 or 888 or 688 as a replacement fan. And what you're looking at right here is what comes in the box. And I paid around $14 or $15, I think, for this. Really reasonable, considering if you didn't have this kind of a replacement, the fact that these metal brackets are an inch different. You're talking construction on your ceiling, getting up in the attic and remounting, and I've got a stucco ceiling. I would have had to have shimmed and re-stuccoed, and it would have been a huge cost to do that. But this swap here cost me basically $15 and about 15 minutes of my time.